Hello everybody, so I am inspired to share. I just wrote a blog titled The Top 5 Thoughts of the Ego, Top 5 Lofty Thoughts of the Ego. And although there are 5 that I'll share, there are countless. These just happen to be the ones I chose to have fun with. So I thought I'd share a little bit of my contemplation with regards to these thoughts. And these are thoughts that we find ourselves very easily expressing or saying, or thoughts that we've heard and we accept them as true. And perhaps these thoughts become our experience because we believe them to be true, but with an intent to go deeper into what's behind those thoughts and why perhaps it's helpful to investigate them, I will share my thoughts on them. And the first lofty ego thought is time heals everything. Now, this is something that a lot of people have said, or we hear said, and certainly I've heard and I've believed that time heals everything. And we have a lot to believe. We have a lot of evidence to show us that time heals everything. And in my experience, when I think about perhaps like transgressions or things of the past that may have happened to me, things of the past that I didn't like, and I recognize the distance between where I seemingly am right now and where those transgressions took place, and certainly the farther on the timeline, the more distance there seems to be between me and whatever that transgression is. And so I can assume or make the assumption that, oh, time does heal. And so we need time to heal. And so I'm here to say that that is not true. That is an ego lofty thought. What's really happening, if I investigate this, or if we investigate this, what we'll recognize is the perception that there's distance between where I am right now and that transgression certainly eases the impact of that transgression, but it isn't time that does that. Certainly there are things or transgressions that happen that people hold on to for many, many years, and it's just as real in its effect as it was at the moment it happened. So it isn't necessarily time that heals. What heals is the absence of that thought. So the attention is freed up from that transgression. So really the healing is in the freeing up of the space within the mind. So there's no more clenchy attention on that past hurt. Now, why is that important to recognize? Well, or maybe it's not important, I don't know. But for me, I think it's important because when we recognize that it's merely the withdrawn attention that frees us up, then we can choose to withdraw attention from anything at any moment. Sounds easier said than done, but that's really what a miracle is. When we ask for a miracle, we're asking a shift in perception. So whereas the transgression may feel very real to us, whether the hurt or the pain, or whatever it is may feel very real to us right now in this moment, what we want is we want distance from that thought and that idea. We want actually complete freedom from that thought and idea. We don't have to wait on time for that. We can ask for the correction in mind. We can ask for the mind to see it differently or see differently. See the absence of it, the absence of whatever it is that we think is our upset. That is what the Course means when it says the miracle saves time. We don't have to wait on time. We can be saved or find salvation from that hurt and pain right now. The idea that time heals everything is just an ego's way of keeping us bought into the idea of time. And in actuality, time is what is where we suffer. When we believe in time, when we see our self-concept on a timeline, we are always suffering. In fact, if we go back in the timeline to remind ourselves of the transgression, we will suffer right now. So time does not heal. Time, being on the timeline, is what seemingly causes suffering. The second lofty thought is, I create my reality. A Course in Miracles is very clear. It says reality doesn't need our help creating. Reality is of itself created and continues to extend and create without our help. This belief that I create my reality is a belief that I actually held on to for a very, very long time, and I felt very strongly about it. In fact, there have been many experiences in my life where I convincingly believed that I manifested certain things. And I'm sure we all have stories where we can argue that that is the case. And this isn't a talk about whether or not that's true or not, but rather a willingness to see the reason why we would want to let that belief go. And it is this: if I'm creating my reality, then there's still a self-concept seeking something in the world. If I'm creating reality, then I have to accept that I'm creating also the seeming bad things that happen in my experience, for which I will suffer, for which I will experience guilt. So there's really no win in this idea that I create my reality, with the exception of the fact that the mind is very powerful. And so that's not to say that we can't make for a particular perception or a way of seeing. So this is not to say that there's anything wrong with the belief I create my reality. This is to say that that is not true. And if we're willing to give it up, what opens up is a release from the personal sense of personal self-concept that has to do anything and create anything. Boy, that's a lot of work. I remember I used to do the posters with the pictures of what I wanted to create. And I used to meditate and bring up the feeling. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I was in joy when I did that. So that's all that really matters, is if we're in our joy doing it, then do it. But we don't create a reality. Reality does not need our help to be itself. It is always happening. Life is always being. So we don't need to do anything. And the aim of enlightenment or freedom is really the dissolving of the self-concept. And so the idea that I create my reality keeps the self-concept in place. The third lofty thought of the ego, and this is a funny one. I kind of laugh sometimes when I hear it, because I don't want to devalue this idea, not that I could, but I don't want to seem like I'm against it. But oftentimes we are finding ourselves in a sense of gratitude because of things. In fact, the Course talks about this towards the end of the Course, if I'm not mistaken, about the reason to be grateful has nothing to do with things in our experience, including the experience of this animated body. In other words, we hear people say, oh, I'm so blessed to be alive. And if we feel blessed, that's perfectly fine. But if we feel blessed because of the animation of the body, then what happens when the body is no longer here? Are we no longer blessed? So usually when people say, I'm blessed to be alive, I'm blessed to have woken up this morning, I'm not in the ground, that saying, every day that I'm not in the ground is a blessed day. Well, you are the ground. You are everything. And that statement there's a subtle hint of fear in that statement, which is really the fear of death. And the value in looking at this from a wider perspective is the understanding of really what it means to be alive has nothing to do with the animation of the body. To come into the awareness of what we truly are, which is life itself, is to recognize that life is eternal. And yes, we are blessed, but not because of the body that's animated, because we are life itself that is eternal. even if we're not aware of our eternal nature, if you will, or we are not yet free of what we would call the ego's thought system, still we can intellectually understand that if our gratitude is based upon a specific and a particular of the world, it is bound to change. So if we're grateful because we're alive, then we're going to fear death. There's no way around it. But to be grateful because you are life itself means you're grateful, your gratitude is not dependent on anything that's happening in the world. Because shit does happen in the world. And life itself is always doing fun and amazing things, including dying into itself and waking up to itself. Always. And so gratitude is an experience of complete welcoming of everything. Ego lofty thought number 4, I am God. I used to think that I am God back when I thought I created my reality. And this is not to say that we are not children of God and that we are not extensions of God. But how can a separate self-concept claim that they are God, that they are source of all things? If that were a true statement, really, if that were really a true statement that any one of us was God, then we probably wouldn't have any experience in this world or of this world, because this world is based on separation. Why linger in a world of separation if you are indeed God? So we're not God. Now, we share in God's attributes. We are created like God in His image, in His likeness. So that means we can love like God. We can extend love like God. We can communicate like God. We can be creative like God. We can create like God. We are eternal. We are omnipotent. But there is a fundamental difference between us and God, and that is He created us. We didn't create God. Another teaching from A Course in Miracles. I have parents. I am created in the likeness of my parents. I am like my parents in many ways. I have 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes. I even have the same features, personality traits perhaps. So in every way I can be like my parents. I can even be a parent if I chose to. Very unlikely thing to happen to me these days. So I can do all that, but I could never be the parent of my parents. I could never be the source of my mother and father. I could never give birth or, propagate my parents. So there is a fundamental difference, and it is very spiritually lofty to think that one is God. And I think it's probably the height of arrogance on the part of the ego's thought system to think that it's God, and it's really tricky. It's really tricky. It's not true. And the 5th ego thought that I thought it's important to mention, because sometimes I've heard it before, I've had the experience before, and it's this idea that there are negative energies for which we need to protect ourselves. And I see this a lot sometimes on Facebook or in social media, or it's in the mind with regards to spiritual energies and spiritual treatments. And again, there's nothing wrong with any of it. But if we stop and think that if indeed we need to protect or run away from what we see as negative energies, then we are subscribing to the belief or the idea that there's actually negative energy outside of us. And if we are indeed one, then that would contradict the truth. So it must be that if I perceive negative people, if I perceive negative energies, it must be that the error is in my perception, for which only accepting the atonement for myself will correct it. Not running away from it. It doesn't mean we subject ourselves to a negative experience or seeming negative experience unwillingly. It doesn't mean that we pretend that we're not affected by other people, but it is to bring back the projection in mind. Where are we holding the thoughts and the beliefs about the negative energy that we perceive? Where's the negative energy within us that we have not yet accepted and forgiven? So it can't be that there's something outside of us with negative energy. There can't be negative people out there. There can't be negative forces out there. There can't be anything out anywhere, because our truth, it lies in the wholeness. It lies in life itself. And so if it's part of life, it is us, which means basically there's nothing that's in existence that isn't part of us. And it isn't until we are willing to accept or willing to allow for all parts of life to be in experience, the seeming good, bad, and ugly. It isn't until there's a willingness to accept that or allow that. It isn't until there's a willingness to allow that we can be free. It is in the allowance of it and the forgiveness and the overlooking of the perception that we have on external things that we become free. So those were just a few of the lofty thoughts that I was playing with in my mind. I hope you enjoyed them. If you can think of other ego lofty thoughts, please send them my way. I'd love to examine them with you and share them on my posts. Love you.